Chapter 11, The Basics of Capital Budgeting, with Diana Temsky from the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse. So what are we talking about with capital budgeting? Before we get started on the rest of the slides I have to show you, I do want to note to you that capital budgeting is a very real topic that involves very important decisions regarding capital expenditures and capital projects. It is certainly something that financial managers, do contemplate. It's a very big part of their job. So it is an important topic for us in this class in Finance 355. So what is it? What are some thoughts, some definitions for you? First of all, capital budgeting has a long-term focus. The focus is on the long term over a number of years, sometimes several years. It involves decisions, as I just noted to you, with huge amounts of money. Basically, it's a firm or the financial managers of a firm contemplating which projects should they undertake, what should they add to their fixed assets. That can mean a lot of things. It can mean building new buildings, new plants, buying new equipment, replacing old equipment, pursuing new product lines. It can be all kinds of things. Some examples of capital projects. Think for a second, if you can, on your own. If you need to pause this, of course, go ahead and do so. But consider for yourself, what comes to mind when you think of capital projects that a firm might be spending money on? What might a company or an organization that you know of, what might be something big that they're looking at spending money on? I'll give you a second to think about that. So pause if you need to. Come back. Some things that immediately come to mind. My experience at Ashley Furniture gives me countless examples. Building new buildings, new locations, building new facilities. I know Ashley Furniture right now is in the process of building a new distribution center and factory in Advance, North Carolina. That's a great example of a capital project. How does a firm like that go about deciding that they're going to do that? Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes. Some other examples. UWL as an organization, not necessarily as a business, but some capital projects we're undertaking. Think of all the new buildings that are going up, new parking lots. Those are capital projects. So that should give you kind of a general idea to get started. A general rule of thumb is that financial managers should make decisions in investing money that are going to enhance shareholder wealth for the firm. This is long term, so always consider the long term. That's what's most important for the financial management team. But projects that they're going to undertake do need to enhance the wealth for the firm. So a couple of notes on characteristics, and as you read Chapter 11 in your textbook, you're going to come across characteristics and classifications. There are two ways we can characterize business projects, and the definitions there for you are on the screen. The first are the independent projects. Independent projects are those that have no competing alternatives. It involves projects where a firm could accept as many and pursue as many as they can literally afford. So Ashley Furniture, for example, they're building this new facility in North Carolina. Let's say they're also endeavoring to expand in Arcadia. And let's say they're building new home stores, which you may be very familiar of. And let's say they're building a new facility in Vietnam. All kinds of different things. As long as those projects that I just rattled off aren't doing the same thing, they can go ahead and pursue them as long as they can afford them and as long as they're going to add money to the firm or add value. So independent means they can pursue more than one, as many as they can afford, as long as those projects they're looking at don't accomplish the same thing. The other main classification is that of a mutually exclusive set of projects. A mutually exclusive set of projects is one where only one project can be accepted. So let's use my Ashley Furniture example again. Let's say that this development in North Carolina that Ashley Furniture is working on, this new facility, let's say that when they did that, they also considered doing the same thing in Mississippi. They considered building the same type of facility in Georgia, maybe in California, all kinds of things. But they are all competing alternatives. All of their considerations were going to accomplish the same thing. They just needed to pick the one that was the best. So mutually exclusive projects have us pursuing projects, the project that's going to be the best. Only one is going to be pursued. Now we can also break these down by various classification, and here's the different types. Read about these in your textbook. You don't need me to read the different types of projects. They're right there for you on the screen. I will note to you that as we look up and down the scale here of the different types of projects, they get more risky. Replacing, things in an operation where the operation is continuing, meaning just replacing old equipment, that's not a very risky project for a firm to pursue. But as you go down the list, they get riskier. A merger is very risky for a firm to pursue. So some steps to capital budgeting. Trying to go kind of in order of your textbook out there and the material they provide to you. Here are the steps. You can see them on the screen. We'll kind of do these in action as we put the techniques into play that we're going to look at working on. So capital budgeting techniques, what are they? Well, there's 4 that we're going to look at. Your textbook authors discuss 5. We're only going to do 4. The first is net present value. The second is internal rate of return. The third, modified internal rate of return. And then the fourth, the payback period. That's what I'm going to teach you how to do here in the screencast and the next screencast. I'm not going to hold you responsible for the discounted payback period. That is in your textbook. I'm not going to make you do it. I think 4 is enough. It's worth noting to you that there are other capital budgeting methods as well. The profitability index is common, as is the EAA, and there are others. 4 is enough. If you're a finance major, you can pursue the others as you go on in your education. So the first capital budgeting technique we're going to look at is the net present value, or the NPV method. This is not new to you. You learned a little bit about this when you did time value of money. Here's where we put it to use in financial decision making. Definitionally, the net present value is the sum of the present values of all cash inflows and outflows of a project discounted at the cost of capital. There's the equation for you. We're going to use our BA2 Plus calculators. It's important to note that as a measure, the net present value estimates how much value a project's going to add to the firm. So we measure it in dollars. And as we do so, there are some assumptions with net present value. We're going to assume that all projects we evaluate in this class are equally risky. We're going to assume the cash flows have been adjusted to reflect taxes, depreciation, and salvage values. And we're also going to assume that all cash flows that we're looking at occur at the end of the year. So out of those capital budgeting steps that were on a previous slide, note that you aren't going to have to calculate cash flows in this class. They're going to just be given to you, and you don't have to assess risk either. It's just going to be provided to you. So let's look at how we compute net present value. Here's 2 projects. The weighted average cost of capital that you learned about in Chapter 10 in this situation is 10%. And I ask you, what is the net present value for each project? And then the follow-up question is, what if the weighted average cost of capital changes? So let me bring my calculator into view for you here, and we'll go ahead and plug these in and get you started on calculating net present values. Okay, so let's plug these in and calculate net present value for these projects. So project A, let's do that first. Remember, we access the cash flow worksheet that we need to enter for finding net present value by pushing the cash flow button. If something's stored in your calculator from a previous problem, you can clear this out by pushing second and then the clear button. And when we do capital budgeting problems, we're going to have a cost at the beginning of the project. There's always a cost to start something. So cash flow point 0 at the beginning, in this case, is $7,000, and we enter that in as a negative because that's the cost of the project. That's the initial cash outlay. So enter that, arrow down, cash flow 1 for project A is $5,000. Plug that in, enter, arrow down, frequency is 1, arrow down, cash flow 2, $3,000. Enter, arrow down, frequency of 1 again, cash flow 3, $1,000. Enter, arrow down, frequency of 1. Then you push your net present value button. And the I for net present value with capital budgeting is the cost of capital. So it's 10%. We can also refer to this cost of capital as the required rate of return for the firm. Plug in 10, arrow down, and push compute. So you see net present value for project A is $776.11. Jot that down for yourself in your notes. And now let's do project B. So second, clear work. So $7,000. Oops, one too many zeros. There we go. That's our cost at point 0. Arrow down, $1,000 in year 1. Arrow down, frequency of 1. Arrow down, cash flow 2, $3,000. Enter. Once again, frequency of 1. Arrow down, and cash flow 3, $6,000. Enter. And frequency of 1 again. Push your net present value button. 10 for your I. Arrow down and hit compute. And you see that net present value for project B is $896.32. Jot that down in your notes. Okay, so the question, what if the cost of capital changes? Let's say it goes up to 12%. Interest rates went up in the economy, or maybe the firm's just riskier, etc., etc. Let's do project B here since we just plugged it all in. And let's just go back. Let's say interest rates, instead of being 10%, went up to 12%. And let's plug in 12, enter, arrow down, and compute. So if interest rates go up for project B, the net present value ends up being $555.12. So what happened? What happened is as the cost of capital went up, the net present value went down. So net present value is sensitive to changes in the cost of capital, and it's that same inverse relationship that we've been looking at all along. Interest rates go up or down, and your end result goes the opposite direction, okay? So you can do the same thing for, let's look at project A. We've got to plug that in again as I clear that out. And let's find out what the net present value would be for project A if those interest rates went up to 12%. So as you can see, I'm just plugging in our cash flows here. And 12% now. Enter, arrow down, push compute. So this net present value changed as well. If the cost of capital goes up to 12%, notice that our net present value is $567.65. So if I were to ask the question, which project should this firm pursue? How do you make a decision? Or what do you do? Well, the next slide talks about the rationale for the net present value method. When projects are independent, remember that means the firm can accept more than one. They can accept as many as they can essentially afford. If projects are independent, the net present value just needs to be positive. And the net present value for both project A and project B in either situation was positive, okay? They're greater than 0, that means they add wealth to the firm. If the projects are mutually exclusive, meaning that only one could be pursued, then what? Well, then the project with the higher net present value should be chosen. And notice that depending on the cost of capital we use, notice if you jotted those all down in your notes, notice that our decision would have changed. If the cost of capital was 10%, project B had the higher net present value. If the cost of capital is 12%, project A had the higher net present value. What does the firm do then? Notice or take note of this. It's kind of an important concept. Net present value as a method is sensitive to changes in the interest rates, hence the cost of capital. What does the firm do? They just do further analysis. It's important when you're spending lots of money. In this case, you could assume that several zeros are probably dropped. We're probably talking about millions for any given firm. They want to make the best decision for the firm. The net present value as a measure is the net gain in wealth for the firm.